Today, we're going to talk about something that has shaped the world as we know it, the Atlantic slave trade. Now, we've all heard the argument, well, everybody was a slave at some point in history, but that's not true. And even when other forms of slavery existed, they were not the same as the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery before the 15th century was mostly about debt, class, or war. You lost a battle, you might be enslaved. You owed money, you might work off that debt, but you were never reduced to being less than human just because of the color of your skin. The Atlantic slave trade changed that forever. What's good, family? You're listening to My Black American Commentary. I'm Ann, a descendant of the enslaved, rooted in South Carolina, bringing you commentary on social issues, politics, pop culture, history, and family, from a Black American lens. If you're new here, welcome. Pull up a chair. If you're day ones, I see you. Like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe. Let's grow this conversation. In ancient societies, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, Asia, and even parts of Africa, slavery existed, yes, but here's the difference. It was not permanent. A person could be freed. It was not hereditary. Your children weren't automatically slaves, and your identity wasn't erased. You could still be a part of your people, your culture, your nation. So when people try to say slavery has always been around, as if to downplay the horror of the Atlantic trade, they're ignoring these fundamental differences. What Europe created was not just slavery, it was racialized slavery, a system built on the idea that people of darker skin were subhuman and deserved no rights at all. With colonization and the rise of the Atlantic slave trade, Europeans invented something brand new, the concept of race. They decided that if your skin was dark, you were not only different, but less than. Race became the justification for genocide, for colonization, for slavery. Africans, Native Americans, and indigenous people worldwide were suddenly labeled as savages, animals, people without culture, without history, without civilization. Europeans told them, your life is worthless compared to ours. This is where the myth of black inferiority was born. And let's be clear, that myth didn't die with slavery. It continues to haunt the descendants of enslaved people to this very day. Now, let's be very clear about the physical and mental abuse that defined the Atlantic slave trade. This was not just about free labor. This was about terror. Enslaved men, women, and children were whipped until their flesh was shredded, often for minor offenses, like not working fast enough. Some were branded with hot irons, treated like livestock. Women were systematically raped by slaveholders, not only as an act of domination, but to create more enslaved children who would add to the master's wealth. Family members were ripped apart, children sold away from mothers, husbands from wives. The grief was intentional because destroying bonds meant easier control. The mental abuse was just as calculated. Slaves were told daily that they were animals, incapable of thought, undeserving of freedom. They were forced to accept new names, new religions, and a false narrative of inferiority. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a system designed to break the body and the spirit so that generations of people would accept enslavement as natural. And even when some resisted, the brutality served as a warning to others. This is what will happen if you dare to fight back. The Atlantic slave trade wasn't just about Africans. Colonizers also targeted indigenous people across the Americas and beyond. In South Africa, for example, the Dutch settlers, known as Boers, tried to enslave the native Africans, but the Africans resisted fiercely. So what did they do? They imported Indians as slaves, forcing them into bondage because the locals refused to submit. This shows how the system of racial slavery became global. It wasn't just one region. It was an international project to dehumanize darker-skinned people everywhere. The Atlantic slave trade caused massive destruction that still shapes the world today. For Africans, over 12 million were taken from their homelands. Millions more died during capture in the Middle Passage. Their names, languages, and religions were stripped away. They were given new names, new gods, and told that everything about who they were was wrong. For indigenous people in the Americas, colonization destroyed entire civilizations, stole land, and replaced culture with European systems of control. For global society, it embedded the idea of racial hierarchy, that darker skin meant less value. And it didn't stop there. With the invention of the musket, Europeans gained a weapon that changed the balance of power in Africa. Wars became deadlier, and colonizers could force nations into submission. Once Europe realized Africa was rich in resources, gold, diamonds, oil, and today rare earth minerals, they made sure to cripple the continent's ability to defend itself. By design, Africa was handicapped. Compare it to countries like Japan or Thailand, which were never fully colonized. They had the freedom to grow on their own terms, while Africa was robbed of its wealth and independence for centuries. The stereotypes born during slavery traveled across the oceans. The idea that Africans were lazy, violent, or unintelligent became global. It was the same playbook everywhere. In Africa, colonizers said Africans were not capable of ruling themselves. In America, enslaved Africans and their descendants were painted as criminals or brutes. In the Caribbean, Black people were portrayed as unruly and in need of European civilizing. And the media, then and now, plays a role. Back then, it was colonial propaganda. Today, it's news broadcasts, films, and social media. The narrative hasn't changed. Darker-skinned people are problems, while whiteness is associated with order and power. Another weapon of colonization was religion. Christianity was used not as a faith of liberation, but as a tool of control. On plantations, enslaved Africans were taught to obey their masters because God said so. They were given a white Jesus, and once you worship a savior who doesn't look like you, it becomes easier to accept the white man who claims to rule over you. Religion became the mask for oppression. And to this day, many of us are still unlearning those lessons. And let's not forget, the end of slavery wasn't that long ago. In the United States, slavery officially ended in 1865. That's just about 160 years ago. That's 5 or 6 generations back. Your great-great-grandparents could have been enslaved, or the children of enslaved people. That's not ancient history. That's recent memory. Why does that matter? Because the effects of slavery don't disappear overnight. The wealth gap, systemic racism, the destruction of African nations, the stereotypes and narratives. All of these are direct results of a system that ended only a short time ago. And when you add colonization, Jim Crow, apartheid, and ongoing discrimination into the mix, you realize we are still living inside the ripple effects of the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade was unique. Its damage was global, and we still live with the consequences in Africa's underdevelopment, in America's systemic racism, in the stereotypes and prejudices that follow people of darker skin everywhere. But here's the truth. We can't heal until we name it. We must see it for what it is, acknowledge the destruction, and then work as a people, as a world, to build something better. Because healing starts with truth, and truth is the first step toward freedom. Thank you for walking with me through this history today. Let's keep having these conversations, because the more we understand, the more we can build. The fight isn't just about the past, it's about the future. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne, descendant of the enslaved, rooted in South Carolina. This is my Black American commentary. Until next time, keep your head high, your spirit grounded, and your eyes on the horizon.